After 2 years of saving every extra penny I earned, I finally purchased my dream home in Willow Creek Estates. The modest three-bedroom house was nice enough, but what truly sold me was the backyard pool, a shimmering blue jewel surrounded by natural stone and mature landscaping. During that first summer, I spent every evening after work floating on my back, watching clouds drift across the sky as the stress of the day dissolved into chlorinated bliss. The Homeowners Association seemed reasonable at first. Their monthly newsletter mentioned typical rules about lawn maintenance and trash can placement. I dutifully paid my annual dues and kept my property within guidelines. The community had a friendly atmosphere, with neighbors waving as they walked their dogs past my fence. Some even commented positively about how well I maintained my pool, with its crystal-clear water reflecting the Texas sun. One particularly hot Saturday in July, I was enjoying a peaceful afternoon swim when I noticed movement near my back fence. A woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair styled in an angular bob peered through the slats, watching me with narrowed eyes. I waved politely, assuming she was a new neighbor curious about the neighborhood. She did not wave back. Instead, she cleared her throat loudly. "Excuse me, but are you aware of the community water feature regulations?" Her voice carried a particular tone that made my stomach tighten instinctively. I treaded water while trying to process her question. "I am sorry, what regulations?" I asked, genuinely confused. I had maintained my pool meticulously since moving in, even investing in an eco-friendly filtration system. The woman pursed her lips as if my question itself was offensive. Section 8, Paragraph 12 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that all water features must be used in accordance with community standards and scheduling protocols. She tapped a manicured finger against my fence. "I do not see your name on this week's approved aquatic activities calendar." I laughed, assuming this was some strange neighborhood joke. "This is my private pool in my backyard. I do not think I need to schedule when I use it." Her expression hardened immediately. "I am Patricia Henderson, newly elected to the HOA board, and I assure you, ignorance of the rules is not an excuse for breaking them." With that, she turned sharply and walked away, her posture rigid with disapproval. I dismissed the encounter as I toweled off, assuming Patricia was simply overzealous in her new position. Perhaps she had confused my private pool with the community pool located near the neighborhood entrance. I made a mental note to review the HOA documentation later, but thought little more of it as I fired up the grill for dinner. The evening breeze carried the scent of chlorine and barbecue across my backyard, and all seemed right with the world once again. What I did not realize then was that Patricia, or Karen, as my neighbors had apparently nicknamed her, had already taken a particular interest in my property. Later, I would learn she had campaigned for her board position specifically on a platform of property value protection and strict enforcement of overlooked regulations. And somehow, my backyard pool had become her first major target. 3 days after my strange fence encounter, I arrived home from work to find an official-looking envelope stuck between my front door and the frame. The HOA logo was emblazoned across the top in bold navy blue. Inside was a formal notice titled, "Violation of Community Standards, Unauthorized Aquatic Facility Usage." My heart rate increased as I read the ridiculous document. According to this notice, I had violated HOA Covenant Section 8, Paragraph 12, which apparently required all homeowners with private pools to submit weekly usage schedules to the board for approval. The notice included a $50 fine for my first offense and instructions to immediately cease all unapproved pool activities. That evening, I dug through the massive binder of HOA regulations that had come with my closing documents. After 2 hours of searching through tiny print and legalese, I finally found it. Buried within subsections about water conservation was indeed a vaguely worded rule requiring homeowners to register recreational water usage with the board's facilities coordinator. The rule appeared to date back to a drought period 15 years earlier, but had never been removed from the bylaws. The next morning, I called the HOA management company. "I need to understand this pool scheduling requirement," I explained to the board-sounding representative. "How exactly am I supposed to know when I will want to use my own pool?" "You will need to fill out Form 32B," she responded flatly. "It requires submission at least 72 hours before intended usage. The board reviews all requests at their Tuesday meetings." "But what if the weather changes, or my work schedule shifts you?" "Unexpectedly, this makes no sense for a private pool," I protested. "I do not make the rules, sir. I just process the paperwork," she replied before directing me to the online portal where I could download the necessary forms. That weekend, I encountered my neighbor Thomas while retrieving my mail. "Have you had any run-ins with the new board member yet?" he asked, glancing around as if concerned about being overheard. "Patricia Henderson. Yes, apparently I need permission to use my own pool now," I said with a laugh that came out more bitter than I intended. Thomas winced. "We call her HOA Karen around here. She moved from that fancy development across town and has been on a mission ever since. Last month she fined the Johnsons for having the wrong shade of beige on their window trim. The previous board never enforced half these rules." "Why does she care when I swim in my pool?" I asked. "From what I heard, she believes strict rule enforcement raises property values. She has been trying to sell her previous house for months but cannot get her asking price." Thomas shook his head. "Most of us just comply. Fighting the HOA is expensive and rarely works out." Determined to follow proper channels, I dutifully filled out Form 32B, requesting permission to use my pool on weekday evenings from 6:00 p.m. to 8:00 p.m. and weekend afternoons. The form required detailed information about the number of swimmers, types of activities planned, and even noise level estimates. It felt invasive and absurd, but I submitted it anyway. The following Tuesday evening, I attended my first HOA meeting, held in the sterile community center conference room. Patricia sat prominently at the board table, a stack of folders arranged precisely before her. When my pool usage request came up on the agenda, she lifted her chin and addressed the room. "We have a request from the homeowner at 457 Sycamore Lane regarding pool usage," she announced, as if I was not sitting right there in the third row. "I move to deny this request as it fails to comply with our water conservation guidelines." My face flushed with embarrassment as 20 neighbors turned to look at me. "What guidelines?" I asked, standing awkwardly. "I filled out every section of your form." Patricia smiled thinly, clearly enjoying the audience. "Your proposed usage exceeds our recommended water exposure limits, and your estimated noise levels are concerning for adjacent properties." She adjusted her glasses. "Additionally, you failed to include the required water quality management plan." I stood there speechless as the other board members, seemingly intimidated by Patricia's confidence, voted unanimously to deny my request. As the meeting moved to other business, I slipped out, humiliation burning in my chest. This was not about rules or water conservation. This was about control, wielded through bureaucracy and public embarrassment. Over the next 3 weeks, I submitted 5 separate pool usage requests. Each one was rejected for increasingly obscure reasons. My activity description was too vague. My splash zone projections were inaccurate. My reflective surface maintenance protocol was insufficient. The rejection letters always arrived signed with Patricia's elaborate signature, complete with a smiley face dot above the I that somehow made it all more infuriating. Despite the rejections, I decided to use my pool anyway one evening after a particularly stressful workday. The temperature had reached 98 degrees, and all I wanted was 15 minutes of cool relief before dinner. I had just submerged myself when a familiar voice called from beyond my fence. "Excuse me, this is an unauthorized aquatic activity." Patricia stood there with her phone held high, clearly recording me. "I have been monitoring this property due to previous violations." I climbed out of the pool, water streaming down my face. "You have been watching my backyard. That borders on harassment, Patricia." "It is Mrs. Henderson to you," she corrected sharply, "and I am performing my duty as compliance officer. This will be documented as your second official violation." She continued filming as she spoke, her camera aimed directly at me. "This is ridiculous. There is no legitimate reason why I cannot use my own pool," I argued, reaching for my towel. "Rules exist for a reason," she responded, her voice carrying over the fence loud enough for other neighbors to hear. "Perhaps if you cannot afford the appropriate maintenance and scheduling for a private pool, you should consider a home without one." Before I could respond, a golf cart with "Community Security" printed on the side pulled up behind her. A young man in an ill-fitting uniform stepped out, looking uncomfortable with the situation. "Mrs. Henderson called about an unauthorized pool usage," he said, phrasing it as a question while avoiding eye contact with me. Patricia nodded vigorously. "This homeowner has repeatedly violated Section 8, Paragraph 12. Please document this incident for the official record." I stood dripping wet in my own backyard as a security guard took photographs of my pool, while neighbors walking their dogs slowed their pace to watch the spectacle. The humiliation was complete when Patricia handed me another violation notice on the spot, this one carrying a $150 fine. 2 days later, another envelope appeared on my doorstep. This violation claimed my pool chemical balance might affect groundwater quality, something never mentioned in previous communications. The fine was $300. The following week, I received notices about improper pool cover usage, $200, unauthorized drainage cleaning, $250, and excessive water refill, $350. The financial burden was becoming serious. More concerning was the psychological toll. I found myself peering through my blinds before stepping into my backyard, constantly wondering if Patricia was watching. My once peaceful sanctuary had become a source of anxiety. During this time, I noticed Patricia giving tour of the neighborhood to prospective buyers, always stopping in front of my house. One evening, I overheard her telling a couple, "This street has excellent property values, except for a few problematic areas where homeowners refuse to maintain community standards." Curious about her motives, I began asking more neighbors about our HOA enforcer. Mark from 2 doors down provided the most insight during an impromptu conversation over our shared property line. "She has that house for sale in the meadows," Mark explained quietly. "Listed it for way above market value. Word is she needs that specific price for her retirement plan, but no one will pay it because the meadows has lost value since that new development broke ground nearby." "What does that have to do with my pool?" I asked. "She believes if she can make Willow Creek look more exclusive with strict enforcement, it will raise all our property values. Your corner lot is visible from the main entrance, a showcase property in her mind. An unkempt pool would ruin her perfect vision. Mark shrugged apologetically. Most of us have just learned to avoid her radar. That evening, I consulted with a real estate attorney about fighting the HOA's enforcement. The consultation cost me $350 for a disheartening conclusion. Your HOA agreement has very strong language about rule enforcement, the attorney explained. Courts typically defer to HOAs unless their rules violate state law or are enforced in a discriminatory manner based on protected classes. Fighting this could cost you thousands with no guarantee of success. I returned home defeated, finding yet another violation notice, this time for $500 and a temporary suspension of all pool privileges due to repeated and willful violations of community standards. Yellow caution tape had been placed around my pool while I was at the lawyer's office, making it look like a crime scene. From my kitchen window, I could see Patricia standing with two other board members on the sidewalk, pointing at my backyard and nodding with satisfaction. They clinked their coffee mugs together in what looked disturbingly like a toast to their victory. The message was clear: comply or continue to pay, but either way, Patricia had won. The morning after my pool was officially condemned with caution tape, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by a mountain of HOA violation notices. The total now exceeded $2,000, money I had been saving for a kitchen renovation. Each envelope featured the same smiley-dotted signature that had come to represent everything wrong with petty authority. I felt defeated, outmaneuvered by bureaucracy and neighborhood politics. On my refrigerator hung a calendar with the dates I had requested pool access, all marked with red X's indicating denials. The summer was half over, and I had barely used the feature that had convinced me to buy this house in the first place. Outside, the Texas sun beat down on the covered water that no one was allowed to enjoy. That afternoon, I drove to the community center where the HOA kept its official records. As a dues-paying member, I had the right to review documentation, though the office administrator seemed surprised anyone would bother. She directed me to a dusty back room with filing cabinets and a small desk. "No one has asked to see the founding documents in years," she remarked, dropping a heavy binder before me. "Most people just check the website for the current rules." For hours, I pored through the original community covenant from when Willow Creek Estates was first developed 20 years ago. My eyes burned from the small print and legal terminology, but I was determined to find something, anything, that might help my situation. It was nearly closing time when I discovered a section that made me sit up straight. The original developer had included a special clause about environmental preservation. Willow Creek Estates is committed to maintaining the natural ecosystem of the region. Homeowners are encouraged to support local wildlife and natural habitats on their properties. The clause continued with specifics about the creek that gave the neighborhood its name and mentioned protection of indigenous amphibian populations and their breeding grounds. I photographed the pages with my phone, my mind racing with possibilities. This founding principle predated all the nitpicky rules Patricia had been using against me. It was part of the original vision for the community, potentially more fundamental than her interpretations of pool regulations. As I drove home, I took a detour past a construction site on the edge of town. What had once been a natural marshy area was now being cleared for a new shopping center. Heavy machinery stood silent for the evening, having spent the day filling in a small pond that had been visible from the road for as long as I had lived in the area. I parked across the street and walked to the chain-link fence surrounding the construction site. A small sign proclaimed "Future Home of Meadowview Shopping Plaza, opening fall 2023." Behind it, the once vibrant pond was now half filled with dirt. At the edges of the disturbed water, I noticed movement. Dozens of frogs and tadpoles crowded into the shrinking habitat. A construction worker locking up noticed me staring. "Shame about the pond," he commented. "Been a lot of wildlife there for years." "What will happen to all the frogs?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not my department. Guess they will have to find somewhere else to live, if they can." That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the displaced amphibians, the original HOA charter's commitment to the environment, and my useless swimming pool surrounded by caution tape. Around 3 in the morning, I sat bolt upright in bed as the pieces connected in my mind. The next day was Saturday, and I spent it researching native amphibian habitats and backyard pond construction. I learned about the declining frog populations in our region due to habitat loss. I discovered which plants supported healthy pond ecosystems and which local species were most at risk. I read about the environmental benefits of natural water features versus chlorinated pools. By Sunday evening, my dining table had disappeared under printed articles, sketch designs, and supply lists. What had started as a desperate attempt to outmaneuver Patricia was evolving into something more meaningful. If I could not use my pool for swimming because of arbitrary rules, perhaps it could serve a higher purpose, one specifically encouraged by the original community charter. Monday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the county environmental office. I spoke with a conservation specialist who became increasingly enthusiastic as I explained my idea to convert my swimming pool into a natural habitat pond. She provided me with additional resources and mentioned a local environmental group that might be interested in documenting the transformation. "This kind of private conservation effort is exactly what we need more of," she explained, handing me pamphlets on amphibian conservation, especially with so much natural habitat being destroyed for development. That evening I stood at my kitchen window looking out at my pool, still beautiful, still forbidden. Beyond my fence, I caught a glimpse of Patricia power walking through the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, no doubt searching for her next enforcement opportunity. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The pool had been my dream, but its new purpose might become something far more powerful than personal recreation. It would become my statement against petty tyranny, wrapped in the protection of environmental conservation. I spread the HOA founding documents on my counter, my finger underlining the clause about supporting indigenous wildlife. "Let us see you argue with your own charter, Patricia," I whispered to myself as I began making detailed plans for what would soon become the most controversial water feature in Willow Creek Estates. The transformation began under the cover of early morning fog. I hired a pool service company to drain the water, telling them I needed major maintenance work done. The technicians asked no questions as they pumped thousands of gallons from my backyard, leaving behind an empty concrete bowl by lunchtime. Once alone, I carefully removed the caution tape that Patricia had placed around the perimeter, rolling it up and storing it in my garage. If she wanted to claim I had tampered with an HOA notice, I would deal with that battle later. For now, I needed a clean slate. The empty pool looked strangely vulnerable, a manufactured crater stripped of its purpose. I descended the steps into the deep end, my footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. This space had been designed for human recreation, but now it would serve a different Encetion entirely. I felt a surprising sense of ceremony as I knelt and scooped up a handful of residual water, letting it trickle through my fingers. This was goodbye to my swimming pool and hello to something new. For the next week I worked from dawn until well after dusk. First came the structural modifications. I rented equipment to break through sections of the concrete bottom, creating varying depths and more natural contours. The sound of the jackhammer echoed through the neighborhood, drawing curious glances over fences. When neighbors asked what I was doing, I simply replied, "Pool maintenance," which was technically true if dramatically understated. Next, I installed a natural filtration system using specialized plants and stones. Unlike traditional pools that fight against nature with chemicals, this system would work with biological processes to maintain water clarity. The pool store salesperson had looked at me strangely when I explained what I needed, but the environmental specialist from the county office had provided excellent technical guidance. You want the water to stay clear enough to observe the wildlife, but not chlorinated, she had explained during a follow-up call. The balance of plants and beneficial bacteria will do the work chemicals used to do. 3 dump trucks delivered loads of specific substrate materials, river rocks, sand, and specialized soil mixes designed for aquatic plants. I spent hours arranging these materials to create different microhabitats within the former pool. The shallow end became a graduated marsh area, while the deep end remained deeper for overwintering frogs during colder months. My neighbor Thomas watched from his yard as I planted the first water lilies. "That does not look like any pool maintenance I have ever seen," he commented with an arched eyebrow. "It is not a pool anymore," I admitted, wiping sweat from my forehead. "It is becoming a natural pond habitat." His eyes widened. "Patricia is going to have a stroke when she sees this." "Probably," I acknowledged. "But I am not breaking any rules. In fact, I am honoring the original community charter more than she ever has." As the physical transformation progressed, I became increasingly obsessed with the biological details. I researched which plants would attract dragonflies to control mosquitoes naturally. I installed partially submerged logs as basking spots. Every element was carefully considered for its role in the ecosystem I was creating. Late one evening, I drove back to the construction site where the natural pond was now almost completely filled in. Under cover of darkness and with a guilty conscience about trespassing, I collected several containers of water, mud, and vegetation from the disappearing habitat. Most importantly, I carefully gathered dozens of tadpoles and adult frogs that had been pushed to the very edges of their vanishing home. "This is technically wildlife rescue," I assured myself as I loaded the containers into my car. Still, I drove home with my headlights off through the back streets, feeling oddly like a criminal. The moment of releasing the first amphibians into their new home remains one of the most profound experiences of my life. I gently tipped the containers at the water's edge, watching as confused frogs hesitantly explored their new surroundings. Some immediately swam to the floating vegetation I had installed, while others tested the varying depths with apparent curiosity. "Welcome home," I whispered as a particularly large bullfrog settled onto a strategically placed rock and began its throaty evening call. Within hours, the sound of multiple frogs filled my backyard, a croaking chorus that marked the true beginning of my habitat restoration project. Over the following days, I added more native species collected from the development site. With each addition, the pond seemed to come alive more fully. Dragonflies appeared as if by magic, their iridescent wings catching the sunlight as they patrolled for mosquitoes. A pair of ducks visited briefly one morning, though they did not stay. Even butterflies began appearing more frequently, attracted to the flowering plants I had placed around the perimeter. My immediate neighbors had mixed reactions. Thomas became an enthusiastic supporter, often bringing his children to observe the growing ecosystem from the shared fence line. Mrs. Garcia, on the other side, was less impressed, concerned primarily about potential noise and odor. I assured her that a properly balanced natural pond would not smell and that frogs were most vocal during spring mating season, not year-round. Other neighborhood residents began taking detours on their evening walks to pass by my house, curious about the unusual project visible from the street. Some asked questions with genuine interest. Others whispered to each other with expressions suggesting they thought I had lost my mind. I no longer cared about their opinions. Each day, my creation looked less like an abandoned swimming pool and more like it had always been a natural feature of the landscape. As the transformation neared completion, I contacted the local environmental conservation group. They sent a representative who documented the species diversity and provided me with official certification as a backyard wildlife habitat. The impressive-looking certificate came with a heavy metal plaque designating my property as a protected amphibian conservation area. I mounted this plaque prominently on a post at the front corner of my yard, angled specifically to be visible from Patricia's regular power walking route. Then I waited, knowing the confrontation would come soon enough. The chorus of frogs calling in the evening seemed to echo my growing confidence. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek Estates, I felt truly at home and truly prepared. The inevitable confrontation occurred on a Sunday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after the habitat transformation was complete. I was kneeling by the pond's edge, documenting the growth of some aquatic vegetation, when a shadow fell across the water. Looking up, I saw Patricia's rigid silhouette against the bright sky, her mouth hanging open in what appeared to be stunned disbelief. "What have you done?" she finally managed to say, her voice higher than normal. She stood just inside my gate, which I had carelessly left unlatched. Her clipboard hung forgotten at her side, and for once she seemed at a loss for words as she stared at what had once been a regulation swimming pool. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Henderson," I replied calmly, standing to face her. "I see you have noticed my wildlife conservation project." Her face flushed red as she found her voice. This is an abomination. You have destroyed an approved water feature and created an unauthorized swamp. This violates at least 15 different HOA regulations." A large bullfrog chose that moment to emit a deep, resonant croak that seemed to emphasize her point. Several smaller frogs joined in, creating a chorus that made Patricia take an instinctive step backward. "Actually, this is now a certified amphibian conservation habitat," I explained, gesturing toward the thriving ecosystem before us. Since I was prohibited from using my pool for swimming, I found a more meaningful purpose for it. "You were prohibited because you refused to follow proper procedures," she snapped, recovering her composure. "You cannot simply turn your pool into a frog hotel. The board will order immediate restoration to the approved design specifications." I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. With deliberate calm, I retrieved a folder from my patio table. "I have here the original Willow Creek Estates Community Charter," I began, opening the document to my carefully marked page. Section 3 specifically encourages homeowners to support local wildlife and natural habitats, with special mention of indigenous amphibian populations. That is an interpretive guideline, not permission to create a mosquito-breeding eyesore. Patricia's voice rose sharply. A small group of neighbors had begun to gather on the sidewalk, watching our exchange with undisguised interest. "The conservation habitat includes natural mosquito control through the fish and dragonflies I have introduced," I explained. "And as for eyesores, I have documentation from the county environmental office certifying this as a model conservation project." Patricia's eyes narrowed dangerously. This is about the pool restrictions, is not it? This is your way of circumventing proper authority. This is about following the original vision for this community, I countered, and protecting endangered species. The frogs you hear came from the pond being destroyed for the new shopping center. They needed a home. You have 1 week to restore this to a proper pool, or the HOA will begin daily fines and possible legal action, Patricia declared, raising her voice to ensure the gathering audience could hear. I am calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow evening. I had hoped to avoid revealing my final piece of leverage, but Patricia's threat left me no choice. Before you do that, Mrs. Henderson, you should know that I have been documenting our interactions. I removed my phone from my pocket. I have recordings of your statements admitting this enforcement was about property values and your personal agenda, not actual rule violations. Her face paled slightly. You cannot record people without consent. That is illegal. Texas is a one-party consent state for recordings, I replied, thanking my lawyer consultation for this particular piece of knowledge. And I have time-stamped photographs of you entering my property without permission multiple times, including today. Several neighbors murmured among themselves. I noticed Thomas giving me a subtle thumbs up from the gathering crowd. This is not over, Patricia declared, but her voice lacked its usual authority. She turned sharply and marched toward the gate, addressing the bystanders. There will be an emergency HOA meeting tomorrow at 7:00 p.m. I expect all concerned residents to attend. As she stalked away, a chorus of frogs erupted again, almost as if they were celebrating their defender's small victory. Several neighbors lingered, some stepping closer to get a better look at the transformed space. Is that really a protected habitat? One woman asked, peering at the pond with newfound interest. Officially certified, I confirmed, showing her the documentation. These frogs were going to be buried alive under the new shopping center. They had nowhere else to go. As word spread through the neighborhood that evening, I received several text messages from neighbors I barely knew, expressing support or curiosity. Thomas brought his children over to see the frogs up close, and even Mrs. Garcia admitted the natural water sounds were rather peaceful. That night, I prepared my presentation for the emergency meeting, organizing my documentation, recordings, and legal research. The transformation of my backyard had somehow triggered a transformation in me as well. I was no longer the intimidated homeowner afraid of confrontation. I had found something worth fighting for, something larger than my own recreational needs. As I practiced my points for the meeting, the chorus of frogs provided a strangely supportive background soundtrack. Tomorrow would determine whether my act of defiance would stand or fall, but regardless of the outcome, I had already won back my sense of agency. And that, I realized, was what Patricia had tried to take from me all along. The emergency HOA meeting drew the largest attendance in Willow Creek Estates history. The community center meeting room was standing room only, with neighbors packed along the walls and spilling into the hallway. Patricia sat rigidly at the board table, her usual confidence visibly shaken by the unexpected turnout. When my case was called, I walked to the front with a calm I did not entirely feel. For 15 minutes, I presented my documentation, the original HOA charter promoting wildlife conservation, the county environmental certification, photographs of the habitat's transformation, and expert testimonials about the ecological benefits. I explained how the disappearing natural pond at the construction site had left dozens of native species homeless. The founding vision for our community included environmental stewardship, I concluded. My habitat restoration project honors that original intent while providing sanctuary for displaced wildlife. Before Patricia could respond, I played selected recordings of our previous interactions, including her admission that her enforcement was driven by property value concerns rather than actual rule violations. The room fell silent as her voice echoed through the speakers, describing how she had targeted my showcase property because of its visibility from the neighborhood entrance. The board president, a retired judge who had previously deferred to Patricia on most matters, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Henderson, these selective enforcement claims are concerning. Do you have a response?" Patricia launched into a spirited defense about property values and community standards, but her argument sounded hollow against the evidence I had presented. When she claimed my swamp would drive down property values, 3 different real estate agents in attendance actually spoke up to contradict her. Natural features like this are currently increasing property values in several area neighborhoods, one agent explained. Eco-friendly homes are selling at premium prices right now. After nearly an hour of discussion, the board voted 6-1, with Patricia as the lone dissenter, to grant special approval for my conservation habitat. The president even suggested creating a new environmental innovation category in the community guidelines to encourage similar projects. As the meeting adjourned, several neighbors approached to express support and ask questions about creating smaller wildlife-friendly areas in their own yards. Thomas jokingly suggested a neighborhood frog-watching club, which surprisingly received enthusiastic responses from several families with children. Within weeks, ripples from my small act of rebellion spread throughout Willow Creek Estates. The local elementary school arranged field trips to observe the habitat as part of their science curriculum. The county environmental office featured my project in their newsletter, bringing positive attention to our community. 3 other homeowners began converting portions of their yards into native plant gardens to support pollinators. Patricia's influence in the neighborhood diminished rapidly. When she attempted to create new restrictions on unnatural water features, she flew. Indeed, no support even among her former allies. 6 months after our confrontation, she listed her house for sale and moved to a gated community across town that advertised strict architectural controls. The most unexpected outcome was my own transformation. What had begun as simple defiance against petty tyranny evolved into genuine environmental passion. I began volunteering with the local conservation group, helping document amphibian populations throughout the county. My backyard became a gathering place for community education, with weekend pond ecology sessions that drew curious neighbors and their children. On the anniversary of the habitat's creation, I hosted a neighborhood celebration beside the thriving pond. As twilight fell and the chorus of frogs began their evening serenade, I found myself standing next to the board president, watching fireflies dance above the water lilies. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "in all my years on the board, this is the first dispute that actually made our community stronger." I nodded, watching a group of children carefully counting tadpoles at the pond's edge while their parents chatted nearby. Where fences had once divided properties, neighbors had created small connecting pathways for wildlife to travel between the growing network of nature-friendly yards. "Sometimes," I replied, "the best revenge is not getting even but moving forward in a better direction." As if in agreement, the bullfrogs erupted in a resonant chorus that carried across the once divided neighborhood, a living symphony born from one small act of creative defiance. What had begun as a battle over control of my backyard had somehow healed something much larger than a swimming pool could have ever contained.